Hey guys, I'm Dr. Jesse Riley, owner and head clinician of Modern Movement Clinic. I wanted to hop on and do a video today encompassing a group of clients that we work with. We work well with the endurance and strength training world, but we also work with a lot of chronic and persistent pain individuals. One reason that we work with them is we often find that they have had misguided education or pain principles taught to them. And we feel like basically with modern being in the name that we like to bring a little bit more evidence-based care to their program in hopes that it obviously helps to a better recovery. And so one of the things that we do here is what we're going to present on today. And so the all-encompassing theme of today is basically just getting a little bit more awareness and a little bit more mindfulness around your pain, and finding maybe potential triggers throughout the course of your day in hopes that we can start to change the narrative or perception of the messages being sent to your brain along your pain journey. And again, hopefully finding a way to get out of that pain journey. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up and share my screen with a presentation here. Okay, move that to the side. All right, so without further ado, we are going to talk about making more sense of your chronic pain by doing either a log, a calendar, or some type of data system set that you guys can put together. And again, with the hopes that it creates a little bit more mindfulness or perception around your pain. One of the benefits of using this, like I said, you can use a journal, you can use a calendar, a scheduler. What I'm going to show you here, an example here later on is this client of mine just used a Word doc and did day by day. We'll get into some more specificity here in just a little bit, but the overarching concept here is it allows you to get more perspective on your day-to-day. Oftentimes what we see with chronic persistent pain people, especially when we get to having an open conversation or open dialogue with them, is that every day is a bad day. And I can understand that, like, whenever you've been dealing with pain for an extended period of time, in this case with my previous client that I worked with, they were dealing with bilateral knee pain for a good 3 to 5 years. It just kind of every day seems like the same, right? Which sucks. And one reason that one way that we can get kind of out of that like cycle per se is start to kind of change up what we've been doing day to day. And so it starts with this here. It gives you a better idea of the intensity and severity based on your activity or lack of activity. And you can find some common trends and thus set better baselines for the activity or inactivity that you're doing. And so what I mean by that is basically if every day seems kind of sucky, okay, well, at what points during the day does it actually suck, or is it like super sucky? All right. And then another thing based on this like activity and severity, especially based on intensity and severity based on activity or lack of activity, we need to know like how much activity, kind of what the activity was, or how long were you not doing activity for. And those give us a good guideline to say like, okay, maybe we need to trim that down or increase it depending on like the symptoms that you're getting. Again, we're looking for triggers here. And then finally, it allows you and the therapist that you're working with to have more tangible talks and conversations around the standards of what you're doing day to day, and obviously allows more of an open door to conversation around your pain. Again, if every day is sucky, I don't really know how to continue that conversation with you. You're going to have to give me more details than that. And so that's where this log or calendar comes into play. One thing that you guys can do with this is we sometimes tell people to use like a highlighter system. In this case, I'll show you the example here later on. They typed their font out or their words out in color based on this too, but I went ahead and just highlighted it because I printed it off in black and white. But the highlighters allow us to almost start to categorize our level of severity, and then also just kind of see where our hangups are or triggers. It kind of gets us away from the potential pain scale, even though I'm going to kind of broadly base them in certain categories with these highlighters. One reason why is a lot of the clients that we tend to work with early on, they tend to focus a lot of their actions and movements based around the VAS pain scale, you know, the whole 1 to 10, what's your pain on a 1 to 10 scale. And historically, we've kind of relied on that, right? But whenever someone has been in this like circle of chronic persistent pain, we tend to almost categorize everything on the extreme level. And what you're going to notice here on the examples here coming up is just that. And so what we use for the red or the pink highlighter is usually something around 8 to 10 as far as out of the 1 to 10 pain scale. Has an effect for the rest of your day or your mood, and then last in the following day, it's harder to shake out. I think that gives you a little bit more of a better idea of what that level of pain is, right? Because again, especially working with just a multitude of people, that pain scale is so general that it's hard to think, okay, well, I guess a 5, like, I don't know. So it gives you a little bit more understanding of like, oh, okay, like this kind of pain would do this for me. Again, a little bit more quantifiable, or in this term, like more of like a quality of pain that you have. And then obviously the yellow highlighter, 5 to 7, hangs around that middle ground as far as out of 10. And it maybe affects most of the rest of your day, but then lets up close to the end of the day and not into the next day. Usually that's pretty big separator between especially the green and the red, is one's short term and one's lasting into the next day kind of thing. Because again, especially with chronic persistent pain individuals, we may ride like this pain scale, but then we have these like flare-ups, right? And so that's when we're looking at, okay, that this is going to be a pink or a red, is that flare-up stage, because either I did X or didn't do enough of Y, that kind of thing. Okay. And then the green highlighter is going to be 1 out of 4 or 1 to 4 out of 10. And this may affect like some of the activity or inactivity that you're doing for the next couple hours, but the next day, gone. Okay. I think this is probably the most important part of it. Your journal or your log is only as good as the reflections that you have on them. And what I mean by that is like, you could write all this stuff down, but if we're not really inferring anything of it, we're kind of just throwing darts in the dark and hoping that we hit the bullseye. And this is kind of the first step for why I want you guys to do a log in the first place. Whenever we have pain that's been going on for potentially a long period of time, I can tell you without a doubt that if we don't do any like intrinsic investigation, we're probably not going to get better. Simply because we have to do some self-analysis, a little bit of perception on ourselves, and kind of just going through the details and making sense of it all too. And this is where maybe like if you kind of feel like you're still caught in this spiral, that's when you want to meet up with a therapist and work through this, whether that's with us or somebody else. And so some of the questions that I like to ask is, what themes did you take away from this period of time? And so on this one, I'll give you the example. It's about a couple weeks at a time. We initially sat down with this person and we were kind of doing like a week-to-week thing for maybe the first couple weeks, mainly just to generally start to change or at least get an idea of some of the narratives and perceptions of this person and their pain. And then it allowed us to kind of get a good foundation before we started to spread that out a little bit further apart between visits. And you'll notice that the perception changed dramatically. Another question that I typically ask is, what would you have done differently in retrospect? Obviously, like if we're thinking or looking back, it gives us a little bit better idea of like, well, I probably shouldn't have did the yard work for like 5 hours that day. And now my back hurts, right? And then we can talk about like, well, what would you have done differently to change that? And then what advice would you give yourself for the next few weeks? Mainly because like, as you start to space your visits out with your therapist, you want to make sure that we're kind of setting yourself up for success. It's okay to fall down, but know why you fell down there in the first place and then how to get yourself back up. What goals would you set for the next couple of weeks as you continue to do this? I will say that main reason being with this one is we kind of set less like activity goals for this person. It may involve like some level of activity, but we're probably going to put a cap or some type of restraint on it. Mainly being that some people tend to overexert, some people tend to underdo. So just based on that person, we're going to give them a idea of that accordingly. And it may not even necessarily need to be a physical activity. It may just be more based on the log, or more based on like your psychosocial environments, whether that's, hey, I'm going to set a visit up with my therapist, or I'm going to go hang out with this friend that I've been like not hanging out with. Those kind of things too. Obviously that matters. And then finally, are there any focal points to divert my attention to other than pain? I think this is probably, again, going back to that VAS pain scale, probably the biggest one that I notice initially with people is they focus so much on the pain and less about the doing. Which you'll notice, I want to say that these two different logs are maybe about a couple months apart for this person. And you can see just based on the language and the narrative that initially there's so much built around the pain. And the last one is a lot more built around like the level of activity and enjoying life. I think when we start to divert our attention away from the pain, we kind of start to forget that it's there in the first place. Obviously that is a very hard thing to do for someone who's been in pain for a long period of time. But this is why working with a therapist, whether in the rehab world or the psychotherapy world, can certainly help change that perspective for you. Okay. It's kind of like when you, a good example of this would be if I'm standing on a bridge that's over the interstate and I'm watching like all these cars just zip by, right? At first, they all just look like cars, but then maybe someone next to me is saying, oh, do you notice all the Teslas that are there? And then you're like, yeah, I kind of do. And then they're like, oh, do you notice how many blue cars there are too? And you're like, whoa, yeah, you're so right. Like I'm noticing all these certain patterns and perspectives outside of the fact of just the whole black and white kind of situation. Okay. I think that might actually be that end there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and bring up my phone, but I need to couple things here, guys. Hold on 1 second. And we're going to share the screen. Okay. All right, guys, I'm going to try to angle this a little bit better here. So maybe we can start to see this a little bit better. Okay, perfect. You can see some of my chicken scratch on the side there. I'll zoom in accordingly just to kind of make sure everything's a little bit more specific. But you can kind of see here, like based on the whole highlighter thing, again, this person came in with bilateral knee pain, kind of right above the patella or the kneecap, if you will. And so they had about 3 or 4 years of seeing chiropractors, PTs, doctors, imaging, you name it, they got it. Extremely physically fit individual, but just a lot of like diagnoses here, diagnoses there. And obviously with all that comes like mixed messages of what their body's perception feels like and stuff like that. So one thing that I did with them is I had them almost day one sit down and start to do a log for me. And so you'll notice here, I'm going to zoom in on the top part here just a little bit. That they talked about starting day one, that it hurt pretty much the whole day. They sat down after work and had a workout that day. And then you kind of just know like red, everything red. But you notice they actually are pretty physically fit. They do quite a bit of working out. And so what we did is we kind of focused around those themes of what I was talking about, those questions. So if you want to remember those, you can kind of go back into the presentation and take a look. Okay. And you'll notice more red, more red, more red. We had one green. So there was a lot of initially conversation around like, hey, what is a bad day to you? What does that look like? And then again, generally the themes of what would you have done differently? What are themes you picked up? What would you have done anything differently? What's your goals for the next couple weeks? And those sort of things that we looked for, okay? As we were working with this person, we did do a little bit of rehab activity, but if I'm going to be honest with you, most of these kinds of cases is we're strictly sitting down and just having a conversation, because before I can even tell you where I think you're at, you need to tell me where you think you're at. And we kind of need to figure out like, okay, if you think you're over here and I think you're over here, how do we meet kind of in the middle and figure out what the game plan is as far as moving forward with this? Because there's going to be a lot of conversation and probably a lot of, again, education sounds like maybe I'm kind of pushing that on them. If anything, I'm trying to analyze like what they've been told or what their internal thoughts are in terms of X, Y, and Z. And then we start to open that conversation up in terms of, well, what if I told you this instead? All right, so again, kind of more just like red, a little bit of yellow, that sort of thing. So this is all the first log, okay? Fast forward, like I said, I think that was in maybe like a July or maybe a June, around there. And then as you can see here into September, a lot more positive, positive language, highlighters in green, that sort of thing. Mainly what we did with this person is their goal was to get back to running. But ultimately, one of the things that as we hung out a little bit more, they really wanted to play volleyball. Specifically outside, just because the weather was becoming nicer and that sort of thing. They grew up playing a lot of volleyball, that sort of thing. And so as we started to work together, there's a little bit of like coddling, maybe not the best word, but to some degree, I'm like letting the leash a little bit looser, a little bit looser, a little bit looser. And finally one day when they were in, I was like, well, what really do you think is holding you back from playing volleyball right now? And so they inevitably did it. And this log that you're seeing here doesn't necessarily represent that particular period, but as they got back into volleyball, they started to notice like knee pain was better, but then there was pain in other places. And that was really, I feel like, the biggest trigger of like, wow, okay, this can like, biopsychosocial components can matter as far as pain goes. And what I mean by that is like bio is going to be more of your structure stuff, maybe overuse injuries, those sort of things. But then the whole psychosocial component of things too can have a huge effect on pain in terms of, again, this person hasn't been doing a whole lot or feels like they're not strong. Those can have a huge effect on your pain. And so there was a level of just kind of going for it. So we started with, maybe one game here and there, and they had a little bit of pain here and there, but it was in other places. And I felt like that was the real like aha moment for them of like, wow, like pain is so wild that it can shift in these different places. And that allowed us to open the door of like, what really is pain in the first place? And you can kind of notice again, like as I'm bringing this up, a lot more green. And if you kind of just look at the general context of what they typed out as well, there's way less of focus on pain and a lot more around activity of I'm doing this. Okay. And again, just green, 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 green. So they were obviously very happy to get back to volleyball. This was kind of their last session with us in terms of hanging out. You can kind of notice they were playing volleyball from like 12:30 till sundown. So like 5 or 6 hours of volleyball. Working out was never really a problem for them. They just had to modify certain activities. That was another thing that we kind of worked on, was like, okay, well, let's start to introduce this or that in terms of their workout stuff goes. Like obviously like running is still a big deal to them, which they're kind of getting back to. They're doing a little bit more like hikes with friends and stuff like that. So again, building that community and that social aspect around your pain can make your pain journey so much better too. Okay. Yeah, I think that's about all I have on this, guys. I hope that that helps kind of give you guys a better idea of how to handle your pain. And again, maybe getting jump started now can help you move forward and kind of speed up that process of your recovery, whatever your pain may be. Of course, if there's any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We're at modernmovementclinic.com. We're in the Denver Golden area, but we do work well online. And we also, again, work with chronic persistent pain individuals, but we can certainly work in like the strength performance world as well. Kind of just do it all. And if you are interested in that, again, modernmovementclinic.com, or if you'd like to send me an email, it's Jesse, Jesse, at modernmovementclinic.com. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you soon.